Yeah, I'd say the good news is like, if you're a company and you've less than say, I don't know, 60, 80, or 100 people, it's really not that hard to be. I'm not going to say to be secure, but it's really not that hard to be a lot more secure than your average other company
Mm.
like that. And it's just by taking those basic steps we've already talked about.
Welcome to Survey Booker Sessions. Tune in to hear from people working in a range of industries and roles to provide you ideas that you can take away and use in your own business. I'm your host, Matt Nally, the founder and director of Survey Booker, which is the leading CRM and survey management system for surveyors.
In today's episode, we're going to take a look at how you can make your business more safe and secure from a cybersecurity perspective, whether you're an SME or a large firm. Here to tell us all about that is Conor, who's the co-founder at OnSecurity. So thanks for coming on today.
Hey, cheers, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Before we get started, how did you get into the cybersecurity space?
Um, well, I have a degree in computer science, and then after my degree, I didn't really work in computers and IT, and I was just traveling around the world and working in bars and stuff like that. And while I was doing that, I read this book around cryptography, and that got
Okay.
me really interested in. And it just so happened then when I got home, that the Irish government were doing they were paying for people to do masters in cybersecurity, because they wanted to increase the amount of people obviously getting into that industry, and I signed up for that. And then that was it pretty much. From there, I worked in various aspects of it, and started off in like cyber forensics and
Okay.
investigations, and then moved into what we're kind of doing now, which is the more pen testing or offensive security side of things, sort of hacking into things. I suppose you call it ethical hacking.
And that's sort of trying to get into people's systems and understand where the weaknesses might be before someone else does.
Yep, exactly. Trying to understand what things look like from the perspective of a hacker. Yeah, and seeing if they're finding the weaknesses effectively before the hackers do.
Interesting. Okay, I think that segues quite nicely into one of the questions I wanted to ask, which is, I think a lot of people think back to movies where you've got the guy in a hoodie sat at a desk, or gal in a hoodie sat at a desk trying to hack into a system.
Yeah,
And I'm sure actually that's not probably the case in most of the time. It will be for maybe certain companies that are getting targeted or whatever it might be. But what are the common misconceptions about who gets hacked or how people get hacked?
yeah, that's a really good question, and yeah, it is a common misconception. And so I suppose I'll start off with a small story. It's like about a year ago, a customer of ours who's like a small building engineering firm in like Warrington, somewhere quite random in the UK, small, like about 30 people working there, reasonably small revenues, and they called us to say they'd been the victim of a ransomware attack, and all their computers are encrypted. So that really got me thinking, like, how did this random business in the middle of kind of Warrington up in the northwest of the UK get targeted? Like, what was the process? Because I'm pretty sure it wasn't a guy in Russia waking up one morning and deciding to target this random business in Warrington. So we created a research project basically. We sat two or three of our engineers working on this long term research project to try and understand better how that happens, like how a business goes from being like a needle in a haystack. Say there's like 219 million businesses on Earth, 6 million alone in the UK. So how do you go from being 1 in 6 million to being ransomware? And the results of it were fascinating. So that's kind of, it's kind of what we base our I guess our product and services on. But the results of it kind of like it showed that it's effectively a very sophisticated industry, the cybercrime industry. It operates very similarly to the SaaS sales industry in terms of there's different organizations at different layers, and they're
Okay.
at the top of the layer, like what we call like the top of the funnel. We call this the compromise funnel. You're probably familiar with like sales funnels. There's like a whole range of organizations that are dedicated to lead generation effectively. So they find potentially vulnerable businesses, and what they're doing is effectively mass scanning the internet the entire time, looking for weaknesses that they know are reliable ways of breaking into businesses, and they don't target specific businesses. What happens is the business pops up in that at that point at the top of the funnel, and then those potentially weak businesses will get sold on down to further down the funnel for to other organizations. So the people at the top doing that mass scanning, they don't want to break into businesses. They don't want to execute ransomware. They want to kind of stay away from that. They will just sell those leads down exactly the way like you would sell like a sales lead down to an account executive or whatever,
Mm.
so for them to actually make the sale. Those guys at the top would sell these leads down the funnel for like a ransomware group like Babbook or whatever, or Revel, I don't know how you pronounce it, to actually compromise and extract revenue from that target. and that's kind of how it happened. So that business in Warrington, they made a small mistake in one of their servers, and that popped up on the sort of radar of these attackers immediately, and then that got passed down further and further until they eventually ransomware them and what's the word, extorted them, sent a payment request of £250,000 to them, and that's effectively at a high level how it happens. It's very sophisticated industry. There's like interview processes, there's CVs going around. They advertise for jobs on both on the internet and the dark web. They sell the stuff on forums, like they're the collections of compromised businesses and stuff like that. So it's a very very sort of sophisticated industry, and that's effectively how you go from being one in 6 million to getting compromised. You're basically in this funnel, and as soon as you make a mistake or someone else makes a mistake, that affects you.
Do they still have a priority or a preference as to who they go after? So would they still, once they get those leads through, focus on a large firm because it's potentially a bigger reward, or is it
Exactly. Yeah.
anyone's fair game?
Yeah, like any sales thing, no, they will have criteria. So the for most of like our customers, the sort of the SMEs and we're not talking about Amazon or Coca-Cola here, right? Who are going to be targets anyway, right? For most of those, yeah, it's a target selection criteria, right? So it'll be like the ransomware groups will advertise on the thing. We want companies that have a revenue of more than X million, usually around 5 or 6, has to be greater than. A lot of them will say we don't want healthcare industries, we don't want charities, that kind of thing. But then other than that, it's kind of fair game. And so what they do then, the people we have to worry about is what's called affiliates. So they're effectively like what we would like. They're the gig economy, like they're the Uber drivers of the cybercrime industry, and they're the ones that are scanning and compromising these companies. And then they'll say, right, they'll match who they've compromised up against that target criteria that have been set out by the ransomware companies, and then they'll sell those compromised machines in those companies to the ransomware groups, and they'll take a percentage then of the eventual ransomware. And interestingly, the affiliates get more of the ransomware payout. Typically, it's like typically a 70-30% split.
Interesting.
So yeah, you might get compromised. Your company might get fully compromised, but never get selected because you don't meet those criteria. So that's why a lot of the times we'll see like, oh, somebody did something in your network, compromise your machine, but never went any further, and it's usually because of that you haven't hit the criteria. But there's so many different groups that most people will fall into a criteria somewhere, eventually. But yeah, it's exactly right. Like you might not meet the specs basically for the ransomware group.
Okay, so if you were, I suppose, let's say an SME, whether you're an individual within a company, the one-man band type of thing, or a small company, it might be 5, 6, 7, 8 of you. What are the types of risks that small type of company would face? I suppose they're less likely to be targeted in those types of things because the ransomware payout's not going to be as high.
If you're a small company, you're more likely to be targeted in a sort of like what we call it, a more like a script kiddie type of attack, where it's more of a vandalism, or they've just done it for fun kind of thing, because they know those ransomware groups are spending a lot of money, to actually, they might they might compromise a company and then sit there for up to a year. We've seen, understanding fully how the company works and how to extract the most revenue, before actually executing the attack. So it's there's a lot of investment, and it's not going to be, if they know the payoff isn't there, if the company's too small, then it's going to be a different type of attack, that targets those kind of very much smaller companies. So it'll be more like what we call cyber vandalism, that kind of thing, where they're just doing it effectively for fun, and just kind of break stuff. And then what they can do then is, even if you're small, you might have a lot of good data, right? You might have thousands of customer records in your database, and they can steal that and sell it. So that might be an angle. It really depends on what your assets are as a business. And that's what you need to and that's how we like to think about security, is like, what are my assets and how should I protect those? Because if you don't have any really important assets that are going to be useful for a cyber criminal to sell on, then there's not much point in that cyber criminal targeting you as a business.
Okay.
So it's really about that. So if you don't, if you don't have good assets, you're gonna it'll be like more worried about like cyber vandalism almost. But if you do, then yeah, it's about like, right, what are these assets worth on the open market, and how should I protect them?
Okay, that's interesting. One thing I have seen on a handful of times on LinkedIn is people posting about their, let's say, their email account's been compromised as an example. Someone's managed to break in and sent stuff out as them, posing as them. What's the type of scenario in which those credentials get leaked and someone gets hacked, and how do you protect yourself from that?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. There's kind of two primary ways I'd say that would happen. The first is by malware or something on your computer, or a virus, whatever, that effectively reads your keystrokes as you log in, or grabs stuff off your computer, or whatever, takes the your details from your browser. So that's kind of a classic way, and you get that by you prevent that with the basics. Don't have an good antivirus installed, or even Windows Defender if you use Windows is good. Don't browse, don't use dodgy websites is kind of one of the big ones to not to put too fine a point on it. And the second way I guess it happens is that you get affected by another breach, right? So if you use the same password to log into multiple sites, which I don't recommend, is really bad practice, but if you do, and say you use the same password to log into your Google as you do to LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn gets breached, a very very common attack is for hackers to just grab all those passwords and try them against loads of services. So they'll grab your email account that's been leaked, and say in a LinkedIn breach, and try that all over the place on various services, and they get a lot of luck with that. That'll be the kind of two main ways that happens.
And does it matter? This is an interesting one on passwords. Does it matter if it's a similar password, so it's not exactly the same on different sites, but I've added an exclamation mark or I've changed the letter at the start to be capitals rather than lowercase? Is that effectively the same password? In terms of that type of
It's not great, but it's not the exact same. But like, it's most password spraying things will involve slight modifications to the password, if you had the thing. But in terms of passwords, like, hopefully we're getting near the end of passwords being a thing, at all. Started to see that in the second half of 2022, which is great, where some sites have had passwordless logins and stuff, where you just click the yes or no on your phone. Hopefully that will become more prevalent over the next few years. But one of my main tips for security for everyone is using the password manager. Like, I think that's basically step number one for being a lot more cyber secure than your average person, is to use a password manager. And then it just takes all that hassle of trying to create different passwords out of your hands, and if one gets compromised, you're not too worried then, because you've used a super random password on each different thing. So that's if you take one thing away from this as an individual rather than a business, in terms of business strategy, but an individual, use a password manager. Even though, I mean, LastPass got hacked, which is a problem in itself. This is why cybersecurity is so difficult. But yeah, effectively, that's like, I use the built-in one in Google Chrome, for instance, which is perfectly good, and it works across mobile and desktop and stuff like that. So, but yeah, password manager is the way to kind of prevent a lot of that stuff. And then to check if your password has been compromised in something, there's a lot of websites out there, but the famous one is Have I Been Pwned? PWNED. Pwned is like hacker speak for compromised. I don't know why. And then yeah, and that'd be the kind of two things. So to take away from that, password manager, and then check if your accounts have been compromised, which they have been. Like 100%. Everyone's email will be featured on Have I Been Pwned, and you can run your business emails, your company emails through there as well.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting you say that about the password managers. We use them here, but we with some of our staff then started looking at them from a personal perspective. And when they started putting in all their own passwords, they realised how many sites they actually use, because you forget how many things you signed up to, different e-commerce sites and stuff. Yeah. But then how similar or samey the passwords were, and of course, as you say, one password gets leaked, and then suddenly you've got access to everything.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, hackers, like cyber criminals, mostly aren't geniuses. You know what I mean? They're looking for the easiest route in, and one of the easiest is just like people use the same passwords everywhere. So it's one of the things we look. It's one of the things kind of we look for during pen tests and stuff with clients, that we check if they have this, if they're staff's passwords staff have been reusing the same password across multiple sites, because it's just a really, really easy way in, compared to like trying to, write a sophisticated kind of 0-day vulnerability.
Mm.
To get access that way. It's just they want to go in the easiest path possible, and it's usually passwords are that easiest path.
I suppose things like not securely sharing passwords. If you've only got one login to an account and you just sort of send it over a text or email or something like that, if it's not encrypted properly, and the email gets leaked or whatever it is, and
Yeah, I always say when we when we do like tests in networks and stuff like that, one of the things we like to get on is Teams and Slack, because people are forever sharing passwords. Or you're like, I can guarantee if I went into your own personal your Slack or Teams and your messages to yourself, there'd be passwords in there for sure. Like everyone's always writing, so it's one of the things we do. Yeah, but yeah, ideally everyone should have their own account.
Yeah.
Would be the answer to that. You should know or account sharing shouldn't really be a thing, but anyway, that's not the reality,
no.
unfortunately.
There's a lot of benefits to having your own accounts. It's just beyond security. It's seeing who's actually changed things, so you can get to the bottom of
Yeah,
the issue.
exactly. Yeah.
What else can people do to protect? I suppose one is using a password manager, but I suppose even if then the password's lost somewhere, so someone gets hold of it, you've then still got access. So the thing that multi-factor authentication, is that something that you should always have on if you can? And what is it?
Yeah. So this is another one of those brilliant steps that are really, really easy, but they make you just so much more secure than either the next individual or the next company that doesn't do it. So yeah, multi-factor authentication is effectively using a password and then something else. So that can be, I mean, the classic is something you have, or something or something you are. So something you have is like a a token, or your phone, or a dongle or whatever. Something is a second kind of password, I guess, and then something you are is like biometrics, like your fingerprint and stuff like that. So yeah, the one thing to note is that if you're using it, SMS is probably the least good, but still a lot better. So I use the authenticator apps on my phone, which are, you get the 6 digits and stuff like that. And yeah, really, as an organization, you should enforce that on your accounts. So all your sort of like CRMs and all that kind of stuff, where they support 2FA, you should enforce it. And I've seen like Twilio and stuff. I've seen some companies in the last few years offer discounts on subscriptions if you enforce 2FA. So and that's because it really does make a massive difference to security. So the Google one's great. I don't know if you use that, where it just pops up and says yes or no. Are you logging into the thing? It just pops up on your even on your lock screen. You just tap yes. Like, couldn't be easier. So yeah, MFA, those two things. There's like 3 or 4 steps you can take to make yourself a lot more secure, and the first two are password manager and multi-factor authentication. And then you prevent a lot of easy attacks that way.
Yeah, it's just such a very good point. We use that ourselves. I think one of the very good things as a company admin as well is, on things like Google and other sites, you can enforce policies, can't you? So you can minimum password lengths and complexities, and as you say, use of MFA and stuff, so that your team can't get away with using a 3-digit 123 password.
Yeah. I mean, the whole concept of passwords is a bit mad. You know what I mean? Like, they're a terrible idea, because humans are so bad at them, right? So but we've gone down that path now for like 30 years, and trying to just come up with ever more complex passwords. So hopefully, like in the next few years, it'll a lot of stuff will switch to passwordless logins and stuff like that, because it's a very weak chain in the system, or weak link in the chain, I should say. And a single point of failure for the kind of security of your entire organization. But yeah, password managers and MFA can kind of mitigate against a lot of that.
What are the other types of things that people can protect themselves against, or be aware of? I've heard of things like social engineering campaigns, for example, or phishing and stuff like that. What are they, and how can people protect themselves more?
Yeah, okay, so I think the general sort of public would be kind of aware of what phishing is at this stage, and phishing will be like a subset of social engineering. And social engineering is effectively an attacker trying to get you to do something that benefits them. So the classic example is they'll send you an email that tries to get you to click a link in the email, and clicking that link will do something like bring you to a site that installs maybe some malware on your machine, or get a fake login to one of your sites or one of your admin sites. so that they put in their password, their username and password, and then they have your credentials and stuff like that. So to protect your staff from them, it's all about awareness and knowing that they can take place. One thing that we do that's quite effective, when we run training courses, is we get staff members to create obviously fake phishing emails that target their other staff members, their colleagues, because they know them best. So it gets them to think in the mind of an attacker. So I know there's a lot of products out there like Know Before and Curricula, and ourselves, we do like simulated phishing attacks.
Okay.
But there's quite a lot of research to say maybe that's not the most effective way to do it. But we find that method in terms of getting your staff to write phishing emails to each other, and thinking about what would entice this person to click a phishing email. So like based on their interests or what they know about them. And so it's quite, some of the output from that exercise is quite funny, and it's a really good exercise to run, but it gets them thinking in the mind of an attacker then. And then when they get an email, then they really kind of think twice before clicking it. And we've had metrics from our customers that we've done that for, to show how much it's improved their resilience to phishing attacks. So it's just about getting in that mindset and being aware that these attacks are, you could get them at any point. Like cybercrime criminals love running those attacks on Thursday and Friday lunchtimes, for instance, because they know that people are like in a good mood and receptive to stuff at that point, and not really, thinking more about the weekend and not really in proper work mode. So they launch those attacks like at that time, because it's the best time. Statistically, they'll get a better return on investment from those times. So it's really just creating that sense of awareness. And yeah, you can sign up the services that do simulated phishing campaigns and stuff like that. But I like that exercise model. It's something you can do yourself for free, and it's really, really effective.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the fact they do it at specific points. I considered that maybe you're more likely fall for it when you're busy, because there's that thing if you're just trying to race through things and tick things off and get emails cleared. But it's interesting, when people are a bit more relaxed and jovial.
Yeah. It's as well, like there was quite a famous one involving Ryanair. I don't know if you heard about that one. It was a phone based one. But what they kind of did, what they did is they obviously knew Michael O'Leary's quite like everyone kind of knows what his personality is, and they kind of leveraged that to kind of scare the target into changing bank details for a bank transfer. You know what I mean? So it's like they knew that he would have such a position of authority in there, that the email wouldn't be questioned, or the phone call, I should say, wouldn't be questioned. So it's another interesting one as well. They kind of leverage the personality of the person in charge to get like the administrators in there to do what they wanted.
It's the high vis and lanyard situation, isn't it? Look official.
Yeah, classic. Yeah. They're more rare now. The sort of, that's what we call physical social engineering. But we do those exercises. They're a lot of fun. Yeah, the high vis gets you anywhere, and a mobile phone, you can kind of hide behind it and that'll get you into a lot of places.
Yeah, no, I've heard of stories where people have gone through security tests even for physical controls, like getting into a building, and the guy testing had managed to get to the person's desk, and he's like, "Oh, did they not escort you through?" And he's like, "No, I came through the back door."
Yeah. We did one a few years ago. And the consultant we sent in ended up getting invited to the staff Christmas party. they're like so receptive to it, because people are generally nice, right? And they're friendly and helpful. And that's effectively what social engineering is all about. Attackers are preying on that kind of, those characteristics of staff.
That's very interesting. Another question I had, because obviously you do loads of pen testing and like vulnerability scans and all that kind of stuff. But when you go through and you speak to companies, and particularly maybe with training and stuff, what are the common mistakes that you see people make? With I guess from any angle of protecting themselves.
Yeah, well, it's it's really interesting, because no matter how many years this industry goes on for, cybersecurity, it's the same mistakes over and over, and it's just the basics. And we've already talked about two of them. Like, people are still, if you had asked me in 2010, will people still be sharing passwords and reusing the same passwords across sites in 2022 or 2023, I would have said I really hope not. But here we are. It's really basic stuff. It's not patching your machines. it's having stuff exposed to the internet. It's using weak passwords on stuff that's exposed to the internet. Like a lot of it is security 101, right? Because and people just still aren't doing it, and it's because everyone's busy. You know, I'm not criticizing. You know, I run a business as well, and I get it. It's really hard to. It's not what you're there to do, right? You're there to run a business, and keeping your stuff up to date, and having sensible things in place isn't kind of priority number one. But that's what that's how people are getting broken into, and getting compromised. It's just really, a lot of it really is basic stuff that can be prevented. And then but then the other side of the coin is what's really tough is a lot of compromises are because of a supply chain or a partner, so again, let's use that LinkedIn example. Like, LinkedIn gets compromised and then you do because they have. So that's why cybersecurity is so hard, right? It's just like a lot of it is actually out of your control. You can like become the victim of somebody else's mistake, and then your company gets compromised or ransomware or whatever. So it's really hard. But in terms of stuff that's under your control, is just do the basics right. Keep stuff up to date. Run some sort of antivirus. Block malicious websites, and teach your staff to be aware of social engineering, particularly phishing. Phishing is kind of like the number one route in for ransomware gangs.
I suppose it's very easy to make exceptions and then forget you've shared a password, and do other things, and that's where it then eventually comes to sting you. So it's being strict.
Yeah. Turn on something just to get a file once or whatever. Just turn on some FTP thing out on the internet and forget about it. Like, stuff like that is very common. And like, I think, well, if I was, if it was me and I had a business to protect, what I would do. Have you heard of threat modeling? Do you know what that is?
No, I don't actually know.
So threat modeling is basically, it's a thing large organizations do, but it's effectively like they've got a limited budget and limited resources for security, right? So you kind of say, well, what are our crown jewels? You sit down and think, what's the most important thing? What would I hate to get compromised the most? And for the likes of ourselves, it's probably our customer database, our software, stuff like that. And you start with that, and you say, right, at the minute I don't care about anything else, and then you think, right, what are the sensible security controls we should put in place for that? Because if you sit down and start thinking, I need to try and protect this whole business, it's very, very difficult. But if you're just thinking that in terms of your assets, rank your assets in the order of how critical they are, how much you would hate to lose that asset or for it to be compromised, and think about the controls from that, and then go out in ever increasing circles. So there's no point spending a fortune protecting stuff that you don't really care about if it's lost or not. That's the kind of approach we try to take with our clients. Just like, right, here's your crown jewels. You have to do everything you can to protect those, and then the next layer of stuff, it's not that important, and so on and so forth.
So is it a case that it's best actually just to stick with pen and paper and store something in the cupboard, and not go online, because it's you're just at some point likely to get hacked, or it's more like protecting things?
Yeah. What's that? I don't like. I find that there's a phrase in it. The only secure computer is one that's switched off, or something like that. Which is kind of nonsense, because it's not really a computer anyway, I guess. But that's that kind of answers your question, is that's not a business then, right? So that's what security is. It's a trade-off between, right, we need to do this securely, but we also need to operate as a business.
So I agree with you. It's about protecting all the critical stuff and making sure it's backed up elsewhere and not able to be deleted and modified, and that kind of stuff. But if it's in terms of your backups,
yeah, I'd say the good news is, like, if you're a company and you have less than, say, I don't know, 60, 80 or 100 people, and you do, you're it's a reasonably straightforward operation that you're running. It's really not that hard to be. I'm not going to say to be secure, but it's really not that hard to be a lot more secure than your average other company like that. And it's just by taking those basic steps we've already talked about. And I would start with like a paper-based exercise of this threat modeling stuff, and figure out and then do the really easy stuff, like the making sure things keep patched. I mean, I assume you use like AWS and Azure or whatever.
Yeah. So we've got we're all hosted on AWS, and we've got scanners like your own, checking the systems constantly for potential weaknesses that can be fixed, and we've got all of those types of processes you've mentioned in place in terms of like password managers and
AWS and Azure are great, right? Because it's like it's a whole thing that you don't need to worry about anymore. Is keeping that stuff patched and all. It's kind of their problem. And yeah, you can take that add that extra level of assurance by using like vulnerability scanners and stuff.
If you're a business looking for a software solution, and I'm not trying to plug SurveyBooker at all here, but just as a general, I suppose, point, unless you've got a really, really niche requirement for software, are you better off using an off-the-shelf solution in terms of from a security perspective, because they'll be focusing on those types of things, and therefore do you open yourself up to vulnerabilities because you forget to patch your software, or you don't necessarily know enough about certain security angles on the software? Is it better to look down those routes first, or is it fairly
Yeah,
safe
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a developer, but for tons of reasons, I would agree with that. Yeah, but from a security perspective, for sure, because especially if you use a piece of software that's from a company that's reasonably reputable, they will have had to gone through that pain of like pen testing and code reviews and stuff like that anyway. And you can ask for their pen test reports and like their ISO 27001 type thing, their compliance stuff that to ensure they adhere to certain policies and they have certain security standards in house. So yeah, 100%. It's a really good point. Like where possible, but make sure you see evidence of it,
yeah
because like we about 70% of our business is testing web apps, and we find dozens of critical security issues each
wow
week in web apps. But that's a positive thing, right? Because they can fix those before hackers have found them. So yeah, I go back to your point. Yeah, 100%. It's a really good idea, I think. For loads of reasons, but yeah, what you said.
Yeah, because I think one of the difficult things if you are building your own thing is, do you really want to be putting thousands into checking you built it right? You want to be just putting a resource into building a business and not not worrying about software development.
Yeah, yeah. Security will slow you down. That's a fact, right? So you've got to, and if you're a business, you've got to get something at the door to start generating revenue from it. So, oh yeah, 100%. If there's a solution out there, just use it. I think that's. I mean, you're the same as us. We're effectively a SaaS business now, and there is nearly something for everything. These days. Like whereas we used to write our own like onboarding guides, let's say, when for when people first logged onto the platform, and then in the last 3 or 4 years, tons of solutions have popped up, where you can just do drag and drop and no code solutions for that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So, yeah, that'd be an example of like we would, for us, writing code is a last resort. We use, and probably the same for you guys as well. But security is another benefit of that for sure.
So I suppose overall, then it's the basics are secure passwords, password managers to handle them, multi-factor, and then what was the last one?
Yeah, basics like patching, and then like that situational awareness we mentioned there. Just depending on the type of business you are, you can there's a lot of products and stuff like that. Like, but yeah, if you've got something critical like a web app or something like that, get that pen tested. But yeah, in terms of day to day, it's the things you mentioned there, and then that exercise about writing phishing emails to each other is quite a nice little one that I recommend. Yes, and before you do anything technical, it's that thought exercise around the threat modeling. So start with that, and then work, and then that should effectively create like a roadmap for security for you.
Yeah, interesting. So if you're a surveyor, go and look at what are the types of data you've got and where you're storing them, and which bits do you need to really protect, and the rest, what do you not need to worry about so much? Yeah.
And actually, as an individual, and this is another thing we do. So we mentioned that concept of the crown jewels. Like, so for an individual, your crown jewels are your primary email, right? So like, say if someone gets into my Gmail account, they're me effectively, right? Because they can reset all my other stuff. They can, they can use that to leverage attacks from unaware. They can pretend to be me, and they can access almost all of my other accounts if they compromise my Gmail. So I spend a lot of time and effort making sure that single account is, because also it's my Google Drive as well, where I store a lot of documents and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and personal finances and admin stuff. So I really, really don't want anyone getting access to that account. So again, of the password manager, I only ever access my Gmail from one laptop on my phone, and that kind of thing. It's two-factor authentication, obviously. So as an individual, rather than at the business level, focus on that on that single account. That's like your crown jewels, effectively.
That's a very, very good point,
isn't
because
it?
as soon as you've got access to that, you can go and do a password reset on anything, can't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
more or less, yeah. So yeah, and just the small little thing is if you can rather than SMS, use the authenticator stuff. It's a slightly more secure. SMS can be spoofed and things like that reasonably easily.
Interesting. Well, thanks for coming on today. And then if anyone wants to get in touch just about security stuff and pen testing, where do they contact you?
Yeah, well, they can go to our website, which is OnSecurity.io, or I'm on LinkedIn, it's Conor O'Neill, with Conor with one M and two L's. I get that wrong in the UK a lot. And, that'd be the main place where I'm kind of active, is on LinkedIn.
Well, thanks for coming on, and we will touch base ourselves again soon.
Cheers, Matt. Good talking to you. I enjoyed that.